Hey everybody, Mike with Games Play Badly, and today on Session Zero I have a special treat. These two gentlemen created a setting based off of the artwork of Arthur Rackam. And Arthur Rackam is a prolific artist, and his artwork has been used in the likes of Alice in Wonderland and just fantastical art pieces. So during this interview, while we're talking, I'm going to be displaying some of this artwork and some of the module. It's 165, I think, pages of awesomeness. There are some really cool things in this module. Some randomized tables and things like that. They have a bestiary with about 22 or 23 monsters in it. There's some really cool stuff here, and I really enjoyed talking to Craig and Brian about their creation. And as a matter of fact, the music you're hearing right now was written by Craig as kind of a background soundtrack for the module itself. So I will have all the links below. You can get all this stuff. They have several things coming out. Listen or watch toward the end, and we'll kind of go through everything. And as usual, I have my Gem Firefly shirt on. This is a nice, soft, beautiful artwork. Matt is fantastic. If you want something like this, go to gemfirefly.com, and at the end, when you go and want to check out because you bought a whole bunch of shirts, put in Badly15, B-A-D-L-Y 15 at checkout for 15% off your order. Craig and Brian were fantastic, and I can't wait for you to meet them. That interview starts now. Craig, Brian, how are you?
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good.
Very good, thank you. So you had reached out to me, I don't know, it seems like it was probably several months ago, about a module that you guys had put together based on an artist's artwork, and that is Arthur Rackam. And so you came out with Rackham Vale. And am I pronouncing that name right? Rackham?
Yep.
Okay. Because I look at I just for some reason I always second guess myself. So you have a module called Rackham Vale, which is based on his artwork, and the artwork is fantastic. Throughout the interview, I'll be throwing up images from the module as well as some of the things you'll see inside. But why don't you go ahead and explain to me what inspired you to do this?
Well, simple is this artist's body of work. This guy, Arthur Rackam, was a really famous artist 100 years ago during what's called the golden age of British book illustration. He created illustrations for hundreds of books, fairy tales, books of folklore, even books that were contemporary to his time, like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland and the like. And his artwork remains really powerful and I think so unique. I've always been a fan of his. Craig has too, and all his stuff is in the public domain, so that allowed us to iterate and make use of that art in a fairy tale / folklore inspired RPG setting.
So you bring up a good word for this, because I was looking more high fantasy because I'm seeing brownies and imps and things like that, but it very is on the fairy tale scale, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so, Craig.
Yeah, for sure.
It definitely has, as does his art. It deals with a lot of magical forests and the denizens who you think might live there, both creatures from mythology, but also those from fairy tales. And there's also a good bit of whimsy in both in his art and in the setting itself, which I think makes it feel in some ways different from maybe some other kinds of settings that are out there.
Yeah, when I looked through it, it looked absolutely delightful, to be honest. It was something that I wanted to play immediately, and we actually may be trying to run something with it here soon. But I really enjoyed the artwork. It's so fundamentally it's let me rephrase that. The artwork is so fundamental to the module itself. I don't think one could exist or it could exist without it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Pick up on that. I mean, the whole project springs from the art itself. We didn't sit down and say, let's write a module or let's write a setting and then we'll go find some art. It all came from the art. You know, we started by collecting as much of his art as we could find, using that as our kind of bank from which to draw, and then everything from the book flowed from that art. If we saw a really interesting image of a giant, or well, there are a lot of them. He did a lot of really funny giants and scary ones too. We would then create a bestiary entry for a giant, which we call veiled giants. If we saw an interesting image of a weird guy floating on a bubble dressed in green, then we thought, what can we do with that? So it's very much built on the artwork and built around, designed around the artwork, and hopefully pays homage to Rackham and maybe introduces people who aren't familiar with his work to him for the first time.
And what's evocative about the artwork too is that as Brian used the word whimsy, I think that's great. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain kind of I'd say naive side to a lot of his fairies, and I think there are a lot of games today that are, or settings that are coming out, and everything's pretty dark and pretty bloody. But that can be there here in Rackham Vale, but there's also a side that's just that's light and delicate, and takes you to another place besides the tavern or the butcher shop. So
you're absolutely right. I mean, so let me expound on that a little bit, because this is all packed into one book. So you have what are called Seelies, which I believe are the player races, and Unseelies, which are not.
No, actually, Seelie and Unseelie is an old, I think not as often used today, designation for kind of good fairies and bad fairies. So the Seelie court, as it was referred to back in days when folklore was being written and shared orally, were those who maybe were benevolent fairies and brownies and sprites, although still capricious, and if you made them mad, they would go off in a snit or do something really nasty to you, but they weren't overtly malignant. Whereas the Unseelie court, the Unseelies, are all of those really nasty creatures from fairy that are out to do you harm and overtly tricksy, not just tricksy, but malignantly tricksy. So that we use that classification in this setting just as a way of kind of dividing the two camps, even though one camp, the Seelies, are a little bit more organized, and the other side, the Unseelies, are kind of agents of chaos. Right.
Yeah. So basically, Rackham Vale is kind of something you can bolt on as a campaign setting, correct? Or an environmental setting.
Right. We refer to it sometimes as kind of a mini sandbox, because it is a setting in and of itself, but it's all kind of bounded by high mountains. So it's in kind of secluded alpine valley that could be dropped into any campaign. Where the DM feels like it would be a good fit, but it does use the old school essentials rule set, which is a great rule set in and of itself, but is also pretty easily adapted to other systems.
Yeah, I mean, from the standpoint of a DM, theater of the mind is key, and this evokes very strong images for me to use if I was going to go ahead and actually run this setting. Now, from the standpoint of the bestiary, obviously there's, I think you mentioned 22 or so additional creatures in that. But obviously you can add your own from whatever books you have as well, right?
Sure, or make them up.
Yeah, well, that's what
Mhm.
that's what I think is
Yeah.
great about this, because it's a jumping off point for imagination, right?
Mhm.
So, and I think that is quintessential of Arthur's artwork is it evokes very strong imagery, and it pulls you into um, it pulls you into a it's hard to explain because it kind of pulls you into almost like an emotional state when you look at some of his artwork. And I mean, the Alice in Wonderland stuff that we were talking about, some fantastic artwork in those books. I remember reading them and going, some of the stuff is just absolutely nuts. But it brought me into the story. So from that
Mhm.
standpoint, I think the uses for this are endless.
Yeah, I think for me, there personally, because I've just always loved his art, looking at any of it is nostalgic. I mean, it
Mhm.
evokes feelings of kind of a bygone age, even though I think his artistry and his style is still very unique and holds
Mhm.
up today. It doesn't look like, oh, look at this, this cute fella who was trying to do interesting drawings 100 years ago. It's still, if you didn't know it was from a long time ago, I'm not sure if you would know by looking at it. It looks so vibrant today.
Mhm.
But you mentioned the evocativeness of the imagery. It certainly has that effect on us as the authors. But in terms of adding creatures to the list of 24 that we also have creature generation tables in the back of the book. So if you need to very quickly come up with something new or weird, then you can roll on the tables. And also in the front of the book, we have tables for kind of standard fairy tale and folklorish creatures. So if an encounter table in the book calls for just a member of the Seelie aristocracy or a random unseelie, then you can roll on that,
Mhm.
and it might have, it's likely to have something that's already in your system.
Mhm.
And it's worth mentioning too, there is a human realm here in the Vale. So when an adventuring party arrives, there are rows of people to meet who have very interesting information and stories to tell. And going back kind of to the artwork and the atmosphere that it brings us into, it really evokes storytelling. And I
Mhm.
think the old feeling that the pictures have sends us back into childhood, and there's kind of an openness to telling stories and wanting to live a story, which is why we all play D&D anyway.
It's true.
That's a great point. We describe this as a fairy tale folklore setting, and a lot of times when we talk about it, it ends up being a lot about the Fae element. But the setting as we created it is really kind of on the fringe, between the human realm and fairy, capital F.
Mhm.
It's where those two things kind of meet and rub against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of the great stories about some of my favorite stories about fairy. I mean, Jack Vance's Lioness trilogy, the Lord Dunsany's tales. They're very
Mm-hmm.
much about where that happens. Where
Yeah.
how you cross over. Either you just travel to Dunsany's fields that you don't know, or you something strange happens and you find yourself on the other side. But always it's in that weird kind of gloaming between the two realms that I think is really fun and interesting.
And creates some really fun culture shock too.
Mhm.
When, as Brian says, the fairies take serious things very lightly and silly things very seriously.
Right.
Quote the Monty Python philosophy.
That's right. So
Let them
you
create
have,
culture shock.
yeah, I mean, there's potential for all kinds of weird uh, interactions, because the way it's set up, in Rackham Vale, fairies use this, come over from fairy to this forest and this vale, kind of as a vacation spot or on specific errands. So
Right.
they're there about their business, not intentionally seeking out contact with mortals.
Mhm.
But contact is bound to occur, and when it does, it can get weird.
Weird.
Yeah, I would imagine that they are aware of there possibly being humans in this area, and I would imagine there's got to be some comedy that ensues.
Yeah, exactly. I think there, depending on what kind of fairy or fey creature you run into, it can be very funny, it can be whimsical, it can be frustrating, it can be annoying, it can be horrifying. It just depends on which kind of creature you run into and what
the
kind
choices
of
of the DM.
Yeah.
Or the choices of the players.
Right, exactly. I think that this could be from the standpoint of DMing, this could be it's going to be a lot of fun, but I think it's also going to be, it could be challenging to role play all these individual fairies and their interactions and trying to figure out how you want to represent their relationship with humans.
Yeah, you mentioned that the challenge level, we really made an effort to make this make the book, the setting, usable at the table.
Really accessible.
Yeah, so that so we provided a few tools to help DMs with the thing you talked about, like, oh my gosh, I got all these factions, I've got all these different individual power brokers in the Vale. How does if you're having an arm wrestling contest with the Toad Prince in a goblin market and you ask him, hey, what's the deal with Vale Giants, or hey, what do you think about the No Moon Crone? You as a DM might think, oh gosh, what does this person think about it? So I know I run into that a lot when I run games. So we created a factions spread, which is a 2-page graphic that illustrates how everything feels about everything else. So you can, at a glance, find the character or the faction that you need to know about, and an arrow along with a symbol will indicate whether they're friendly toward them or neutral, or whether they find them incredibly amusing, whether they're in business with them or enemies, and so forth. We also really tried to make, in the bestiary portion, keep those entries as lean as possible. So we tried not to go overboard on flavor text and long descriptors. Each of the bestiary entries is broken down into a few sections. There's a couple of role-playing bits at the top. So if you run into this creature and you need to know quickly how to role play them, there's a small section at the top that gives that. And then there's who or what they are, what they like, what they hate, what they want, who their allies are, and who their enemies are. So each bestiary entry has that, and it's usually small little bullet point entries, so that at a glance you can, even if you haven't like super prepped this particular creature, hopefully you'll be able to figure out what you need, glean what you need to in order to run them. And then the entry also has the stat box as well.
Right. I like the fact that what's there, while it may not be a lot, again, you're trying to keep it concise, is exactly what a DM needs to go ahead and look at and say, okay, this is how this particular creature would react in this situation, the standpoint of extrapolation, right?
I hope so. That's what we were going for.
The real motivation that we got out of it was to create situations for RP, for role play. And of course, combat is awesome and really gets the yayas out. But when you're in situations that call for something other than drawing your weapon, the field is really wide open. And I think the environment we created and the creatures who live there have more to say than just gird thy loins.
Right, exactly.
Which I think is what keeps the game fresh, because you can easily fall into a habit of combating everything you meet. And I think that's widely known as well. And I think everyone is kind of looking for, well, what's really interesting about this game, and why are we still playing it? after 50 years.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's what we set out to do, but we're really curious to know if we pulled it off, if you run it. So please tell us.
I will definitely let you know, because that's what I initially thought about was, yes, there's a bestiary and all these kind of amazing monsters and things. I was really more interested in the role play possibilities within that environment. The detail in which you took to lay everything out, and the thoughtfulness and the use of the artwork, with that alone tells me that you guys put the time in for this. So I'm probably going to run it with, I have a new group that I'm starting, so I might actually run it with them and see how they cut their role-playing chops, you know?
Yeah,
well,
great.
we've also got a load of plot hooks in the book, a whole section of them, in fact, that you can make use of for your new group.
Mm-hmm.
Let them roll to see which hook their character has going into the Vale, or just pick one. And we've got plot hooks that are kind of large overarching issues, the kind of big things that are happening in the Vale. They're not adventure paths. I mean, we don't have a predefined, here's what happens. It's not a module, but there are lots of hooks. But then there are also hooks for each and every bestiary entry. So if you just really like a particular creature and want to create a hook to get a character interacting, a PC interacting with it, then you can choose from among those as well.
Now I'm getting really excited. So this is a one-off project for you guys? Are you looking to do additional? Is Rackham Vale, is this like going to be a volume 1? Are you looking to do a volume 2, or?
So there's a couple things coming up. One is the first thing, and the one that will be out the soonest. We're going to do a hardcover, full color edition of the book. The book at the moment is grayscale. It's in black and white. I'm getting quotes from printers now to do a kind of limited edition. I think we're going to make it a little bit larger to hardcover edition of it. That will be thankfully in full color. Although there are full color bestiary cards available. We created these things on.
Oh wow! Look at those.
Yeah, we created these decks that have the every bestiary entry, every creature in the Vale image on front and their information on the back. In part because it was a way to just make sure that people had the ability to see the art in full color. Yeah. But also as a useful tool at the table. So that, if you've got a book, as a DM, if you have a book packed full of evocative art and you're super inspired and all that, it's not as much fun because the players around the table don't get to see that art often unless you hold the book up and do it. So it's kind of what these are. It's almost flashcard style. Like you see this guy,
Right. Yeah. That's fantastic. I love the idea of doing the hardcover book, because I see that as not only a module, but I see it also as like a coffee table book that people want to go through and just to look at the artwork. And I love the fact you're gonna make it a little bit bigger too, so that way it has some heft to it. I really like that idea.
Yeah, let's make it coffee table size.
Yeah, right.
Oh man,
fold out, centerfold, fold out.
There we go. Yeah, that's going to cost a lot of GP. We initially intended this to be a zine, a 40-page zine, and it just blew up into something way, way bigger than that. And we talked about cutting down all the content we created in order to keep it small and under 40 pages and staple bound, and we just couldn't bring ourselves to do it. We were too.
Well, actually, some things were cut, but there were some things you just can't.
So as a result, we ended up packing a lot of content into what turned out to be 154 pages, and as a result, it is. I mean, I think it's designed really nicely, but the font is pretty small. So I think we're going to boost the trim size a bit. I think that will help address that issue as well. Yeah.
The other idea actually was, we feel pretty satisfied with Rackham Vale as it is. And another idea we're having is to look at another artist and create something completely new.
Oh,
That's
wow.
not related necessarily to Rackham Vale, but just create another bubble around an artist and just be inspired by the work.
That's great. I mean, I love that concept of doing that.
There's so much great content of all kinds in the public domain. I mean, Winnie the Pooh entered the public domain a few days ago. So I think that allows creators to make use of that content in all kinds of ways. And the way that we approached using this content is to really try and make it an homage to Arthur Rackam, to keep him at the forefront of the project. We really tried to, I mean, almost all the locations in the Vale are named after things from his life. It's named after his wife, his school he attended, towns he lived in. And then we have a bio of him in the back as well, because we both love his artwork so much. And to the extent that we could, we wanted to make sure that, if he saw it, he would feel like it was doing justice to his work, and that we'd really engage with it and hopefully helped some new people find his stuff.
Probably a lot of people who didn't have access to his artwork wasn't in great distribution today, but younger people who are gaming can come across his artwork and be surprised and transported. So it was certainly a pleasure to create it. It's true. I know that for Brian it was the same, but the excitement of just looking at and meditating in front of one of the images and saying, what is going on? What's this character? What's this creature? What are his capabilities? What are his desires? And we would also look at details in the work, like behind the central figure, and integrate them into his story or his powers. And that was just exciting, bouncing them back and forth and saying, Brian, look at Brian, this guy, look what he can do.
Well, I would imagine you've probably seen more of his artwork creating this than you ever did to begin with. So I would imagine there's probably some undiscovered stuff that you found, and it had to be awesome.
Yeah, and it seemed to spring even more to life than we had thought so at the beginning, at first glance.
Yeah, he was incredibly prolific, and I definitely came across pieces I'd never seen before, and even books I'd never heard of that he'd illustrated. And one of the most challenging, but I think fun parts of it too, was once we'd come up with concepts for all these people and places, creatures and places, was then figuring out how they're all connected.
Yeah, right.
It's one thing to have a bestiary and a list of locations, but figuring out how everything is connected to everything else, and how if you curry favor with one NPC, how that affects your standing with another faction or town or NPC. And that was, that's that factions chart we mentioned.
Right.
And that was fun, and but also challenging. It was kind of almost like a jigsaw puzzle. We had each of our individual pieces, and then it was like, oh gosh, we got to form a cohesive picture with this thing.
Because otherwise you end up with just creatures who are, living next to one another, almost shoulder to shoulder, having no interaction, just waiting for PCs to come across them, which it's not as vibrant, not as rich.
So you have those amazing bestiary cards, which look fantastic, and I think everybody should have it just to have them as pieces of art. And then you have your hardcover book that you're looking to produce, which I can't wait until that's released, so that way I can get a copy of that. Now there is a paperback version of this.
Yeah, so on our website, which is CRWBR, just Crowbar without the vowels, crwbr.com. There you can get the paperback and the bestiary cards, obviously PDF. We've also got some downloadable high-res images, that in particular the graphics, the faction graphic and the map. So you can download and print them at size if you like.
And there's also a soundtrack if you wanted to have some atmospheric music to play by. And it's a piece that I created with a friend of mine as one of the perks for the Kickstarter fund.
Mm-hmm. That sounds
22 minutes of evocative sounds.
That literally sounds fantastic.
But yeah, the soundtrack is out there and free. It's on YouTube. You can download it from SoundCloud. It's 25 minutes of really cool music, and that Greg created. He's a musician by trade, and so he was pulling double duty on this one. He and a friend of his created it, and I love it. I think it's I put it on often when I'm working, whether or not it's Rackham Vale involved or not.
Mm-hmm. So we have a whole bunch of stuff now that you have available, whether it be in digital form, physical form. Do you have any other projects that you're working on or that you can tell me about? Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, sure. So we have, so let's see, we have the hardcover coming out soon for Rackham Vale. We've got a small expansion for Rackham that's coming out, and a specific location within Rackham that's going to be part of a composition with other creators. And then we have a couple larger projects that are not Rackham Vale. One is a board game, and one is an RPG setting with a license. So those things are all in varying stage of development, although all pretty far down the road. I mean, they're way past concept stage at this point, and right. At least two of them are in playtest, close to playtesting. So
I love everything that you're saying. I love the fact that you're extending Arthur's legacy by potentially introducing people to his artwork that maybe didn't know it was him, but they've seen it, or people who didn't know who he was at all. And then the fact that all inspired this project that you have so gracefully executed.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having us on, Mike. Really enjoyed the time, and looking forward to hearing how things go. And we'll keep you posted on the new stuff.
To hear some good stories.
Well, guys, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I cannot wait to see what you create next. Please keep me informed. I love this concept, and if you do this with another artist, even outside of Arthur's work, let me know what that is. I'm really curious to see what inspires you next.
Thanks so much for having us, Mike.
Okay,
we'll definitely
Mike.
keep you posted.
It was a real pleasure to meet you too. So hey, let's game together sometime.
I agree. Yeah, I'm always up for a game.
Oh, we should meet in Chicago.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
More fun at the table.
I agree.
Thanks again, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
All right. Bye.